Sup guys, Bo here. You might notice I'm using a new camera, so like the quality's improved significantly. I'm kind of kind of winging it today, so like hopefully this should be alright. Yeah. You can see all the blemishes on my face more clearly. Today I want to talk about something that I mentioned in two of my previous vlogs that I did last week, and I mentioned this concept that I was really excited to give to you guys. And in this entry, I'm going to give it to you, right? And essentially, what it is it's what I coin the axes of perception. The axes of perception. And what this means is, I've been talking a lot about emotions and energy versus logic in my previous entries. And basically, there is, as you know, there is logic, and then there is energy. There is how we feel. And essentially, these two modes of perception form two different axes, like the axes of a graph. So, you know, I did that in one of my previous entries. But you have what I like to call verticals. The vertical axis, which is really to do with like logical thinking and hierarchical thinking. And then there is another axis, which is the axis of energy. The energy that I've been basically explaining to you guys in all of the entries up till now. So the vertical axis is the axis that we're all familiar with. It is essentially it is the axis that this society that we live in is built upon. So what this axis represents is basically hierarchy, right? It's when we think of in terms of comparisons. Another way of explaining the vertical axis is comparative thinking. So it's comparing things to each other. And basically, it puts everything on kind of this one linear kind of single, you could say, point. Like it puts everything into a line. So basically, it lines everything up. So no two things can occupy the same space. So that's vertical thinking. And then the other axis is basically the culmination of what I've been explaining to you guys in my previous entries, energy. It is the axis of energy. So this axis is all to do with vibe. It's all to do with how the kind of sometimes ineffable, the intangible and kind of not readily apparent, like, so the things that kind of, the ideas that lie behind the surface, the thing behind the thing, right? This axis is everything to do about that. So it's about energy. Whereas the vertical axis, another way of describing the vertical axis is symbolic / identity thinking, right? And what this means is, like, you take everything and you basically assign them a value. And how another way that these two axes work is that when you perceive on one axis, you collapse everything on the other axis into a single value or a single point, right? So on the vertical axis, if we're thinking like vertically, so if we're comparing, then we collapse energy, so vibe, into one single point, and we treat it. We basically just kind of, you know, we don't really give it any significance. And the same happens on the horizontal axis. When we're perceiving energetically, we collapse everything that's symbolic into one single value, into one single point. And basically, in terms of the vertical axis, the vertical means of perception, we collapse everything energetically into one point. So this also translates as, I also said, I said symbolic and identity perception. So it gives everything one identity, right? So it says that this thing, like this person has a single identity that doesn't change. This iPod that I'm reading notes from is an iPod. It can't be anything else, right? It has a singular identity. And then conversely, on the energetic axis, when we're perceiving energetically, we think of all of our surroundings, all of our circumstances, all of what exists on the physical plane. Just everything that's real to us physically. We collapse all of that into a single point, and we think in terms of vibes. So basically, we look at one particular symbolic action or event or an object, like a person, and we say, okay, that thing can be. It could be one thing, or it could be another thing, right? Bear with me. This is like a very, very, very kind of like highbrow concept. But I'm going to move on a bit because I want to basically give you some kind of grounded example of what this means, what significance this has. Well, let me ask you a few questions. Why is it that some people in civilized society, so in this modern society we live in, why is it that some people who seemingly have their lives together, like they eventually kill themselves, or they turn to a life of crime? Why do they fall through life like that? And then simultaneously, why is it that, for example, some people survive like a hellish nightmare, like the Holocaust in World War II, survive that, and then come out and emerge as these inspirational writers that write amazing stories, right? Like Viktor Frankl, right? If you haven't heard of him, look him up. He's a really inspirational guy. But and also, what is the difference between, let's say, what's the difference between one ghetto kid who turns eventually into a common thug, street thug, right, versus his brother who grew up in the same circumstances and became a billionaire entrepreneur? They started off in the same place. If you looked at those two brothers like in a vertical kind of perceiving way, then they have the same fate, they have the same identity, right? They're ghetto kids. But why is it that one is in the gutter and the other one is fucking killing it in life, right? Well, this is where it's interesting. This is where it gets a bit fuzzy for a lot of people, right? Who don't understand that there are these two axes of perception, who are insensitive to energy. They don't really know how that works. Essentially, these people, they'll pin it to luck, or they'll pin it to fate, or destiny, or whatever they want to call it. They might even pin it to like God, God's will. This is God's will for you. And yeah, so that's the kind of average way that people rationalize this. It's just one of those things in life that it doesn't really make any sense. It's like an act of God or some shit. But in reality, we all live in the same world, really. We all live in the same world. We all deal with the same problems. I mean, like, none of us are biologically any different from anyone else. We have the same hardware. We have all the same capabilities, So, we all have to deal with the same stuff. And so this is the point, right? When we become aware of this other axis of perception. And just before I move on, you know, I want to put in, like, basically just to say that, like, neither one of these is more important than the other one. They're just different modes of perception, right? They each have their kind of, what I like to call discernible function. They each have a use, basically. But it's just that, like, in this modern society, like, people are way, way, way too focused on vertical thinking. Like, that's the only way to think. And they're not aware of this other axis, which is, like, equally as important, and it can really transform your life. So, okay, in essence, this horizontal axis of perception it has to deal with vibe. It has to deal with identity. It has to deal with attitude. And once we become aware of this horizontal axis and we learn to basically perceive in this way, then we're able to basically change the way we see things. We change the attitude with which we look at different things, right? And that is very powerful, right? Because then we can take what we've got, we can extract more value out of it, and we are able to basically transform. It's all this axis is all about transformation, because, like I said, you know, you collapse whichever axis you're on, you collapse everything, you collapse the other axis into one point, right? So if you and the vertical axis, basically, it fixes everything into a single identity for everything, right? So everything has a fixed identity that doesn't change, and you know, and if you're unhappy with that identity, like, well, tough luck. Like, essentially, you know, because if you're stuck in that mode of perception, you're never going to be able to change your identity, like who you are as a whole, as an entire person, like all of your circumstances, right, from the other, you know, axis of perception, because you're stuck in one identity, and the way you perceive things, you have a single identity for everything else. So there is no change, there is no potential for change. But once we become sensitive to energy and how to perceive energetically, then we can start to create our own identity. We can start to be flexible in the way that we see things. You know, one thing that is symbolically one thing on the vertical axis, you know, an iPod, a person, a car, you know, whatever, a tree, you know, it becomes so much more because we're not attached to the symbolic identity of that one thing, a fixed identity that society's told us, that we've kind of reinforced, you know, in ourselves, and we are able to literally change our world. And essentially, we can form our own fate, right? And I'm just gonna say, you know, I believe that like fate is bullshit, in the sense that, like, it's not fixed. Like a lot of people, like, you know, especially the people who kind of go through life who with like just one, with vertical thinking, basically, like they only have one perception of how things should be, of who they are, of, you know, the potential that they have, of other people, of the world, and they believe in fate, fixed fate, because that's all they know, you know. But once we learn, again, you know, once we learn to perceive horizontally, we realize that, like, identity is not fixed, fate is not fixed, you know. We are able to control our fate. And this doesn't mean, like, you can change your reality, like, literally. Like, you can, like, just mind creates reality, you know, that kind of thing, where you just, it's like some psychic bullshit. It's that nothing changes, you know, the present moment doesn't change. What changes is your attitude towards the present moment. And from that attitude change, you can then extract more value from your environment, from who you are as a person, from your value, extract more value out of it, and you can make more out of that, and grow. So you can take more out of the thing, you know, the symbolic action, like you as a person. You can take you as a person and extract more value out of yourself, whatever happens to you, and you can make better decisions because of it, because you're not attached to this one identity of who you are as a person. You know, I'm a loser, like I'm just not that great. You know, I'm Chinese, so I'm disadvantaged in this society, in this Western society. I don't know. Yeah, I'm always not going to be as good as this person because they're luckier. They've had like a more blessed life. No, it's up to you. It's your attitude, right? It's your energetic perception that you need to become aware of and train, right? And energetic awareness builds perspective, right? And a big reason why a lot of people are kind of unhappy and things like that is because they have limited perspective. They only, like I said, they only see things in singular identities. Like this is this, this is that. It's not going to change, right? And as you build perspective, like I mentioned, you can change the way you make decisions. You can change what is available to you, because if you have a fixed mindset about what is possible for you, you're not going to try a lot of things because you're stuck in that identity, right? You will be able to relate to more people because you challenge, you build more perspectives. You try on more and more perspectives as opposed to being stuck in just one, just one. And that makes you a more open-minded person, which means that you can start to appreciate things more. You can start to connect with more people with differing perspectives from your own, right? And everything starts to open up to you. Remember, collapses everything into one point. Collapses your entire physical reality into one point, right? That you take all of your physical reality, all of you as a person, and you shift it along this axis of energy, and you improve everything. You improve everything, and you transform. Right? So this has already been a very long video. It's a very, very complex, you could say, concept. But I hope that's been helpful. And like I mentioned in the previous entry, this isn't going to change the world, essentially. Like, it's not one of those magic pill things where, this knowledge is now going to make you change. Like, to be honest, nothing in, the personal development, self-help, or spirituality kind of disciplines is going to do that for you. It's merely a perspective. It's a very, very, very crucial perspective, though. And if you basically take that on board, and even if that axis thing is a bit too complicated for you, just learn to see things in more perspectives, and start to realize that what you've basically trained yourself to identify with is not as fixed as you think. You're not necessarily the person you thought you were. You can be so much more, and it's that flexibility in thinking that forms the basis of this this other degree of perception. So I hope that's been helpful, and yeah, start being more open-minded, and be a boss. Literally just the reality is potentially yours to make. So cool. All right. Well, until next time.